Yes, Celia and I rode in the middle row of your minivan. Her daughter's feet didn't yet reach the floor from the seats behind us. You had just picked us up from LAX to take us to our hotel across town. The hotel was as close as possible to Jago's new museum for Celia's meetings with its curators and architects the next morning. Celia needed crutches to walk across more than a room, and if she needed to walk across more than a room, the crutches began to hurt her, so proximity was a necessity. She did not want to postpone a meeting about the installation of boxers. She was still youngish, in her 40s, but Celia already had trouble sitting upright for very long. So, instead, she sat slumped against the van's sliding door window. Her body bent awkwardly over the armrest. I asked, "Would you like me to fold up your armrest? It looks like it might be digging into your ribs." She turned to me and smiled. A weak smile, but still a smile, because she still liked to be funny in her own way. "But if we move the armrest," she said, "I might fall into the crack between the seat and the door." You grinned in the rear-view mirror at your sister's self-deprecating joke and said, "She's just being stubborn." No, Celia said. "I'm enjoying the sights. I want to lean on the window." Just then, I looked past her and noticed a billboard displaying one of Cindy Sherman's more famous works, The Girl Hitchhiking. It stood alongside the freeway, and I thought I saw Celia shaking her head at it. Even before we exited LAX, we had begun seeing posters for Cindy Sherman's major show at the Broad. It was the Broad's first solo exhibition. We were unable to attend the opening party. Travel had become less frequent in the past year, but it was a major affair, with Hollywood stars attending, perhaps bringing the art world back to where it had been in the early 80s. But less fun, of course, because nothing was dangerous anymore. We saw Cindy's posters lining the walls on our way to the baggage claim, and after you picked us up and we swerved between the traffic of the 405 and then the 10, we saw her billboards along the freeway. She was larger than life. But perhaps more unexpectedly, when we exited the 10 and began driving through the streets downtown, we saw that Cindy's face graced every single lamppost, seemingly in the city of Los Angeles. The Broad had paid for an advertising campaign unlike any we'd ever seen, not just for a single exhibition, but for an entire museum. There was Cindy as a working girl above us at the corner of Olympic and Figueroa. There was Cindy as a wealthy matriarch at the corner of Olive and 6th. Cindy as a clown at San Pedro and 3rd. Cindy as an over-tanned fitness fanatic, a furious fashionista, a centerfold, a medieval bride. Not only every block, but every lamppost, Cindy's face stared off from above. I turned to Celia, who had obviously seen all these posters as well. Her forehead was still pressed against the window. I tried to dismiss it, saying, "It's a bit overindulgent." Without turning her head, she continued looking out the window and said, "I'm not jealous if that's what you're thinking." You gave a short, "Ha! Of course not," I said. "But it's okay if you are." She said, I'm really not," and turned to me and then back to the window. She said, "I'm really happy for Cindy. She's Hollywood famous now." What other woman's work would be recognizable enough to post on every single lamppost in LA? This isn't even just about her. This is way bigger than Cindy. This is massive. This is amazing. We drove another block. Cindy is a college party girl. And Celia squawked her own and said, "Maybe I'm a tiny bit jealous." You smiled and nodded your head several times in the rearview mirror. "But," Celia said, "don't you dare ever tell her that. Girls?" She slowly turned back to look at her daughters. She asked, "Do you want to see my face everywhere in town?" The girls looked up from their tablets. Margaret said, "No," in a very straightforward, dispassionate manner. Celia smiled and said, "Okay. We won't do that then." After our long journey from New York, you dropped us off at our hotel before you drove to whichever suburb you lived in. Was it Sherman Oaks? Thousand Oaks? Okie Oaks? No, I don't remember. I remember that it was very far away. You'd offered to pick us up, I gathered, because you didn't know how many more times you'd see Celia again. This trip to LA was the first time we'd left New York in more than a year. Celia wasn't expected at the future site of the Jago until the next morning, so we had most of the day to ourselves. The girls, of course, wanted to go to the pool, so the four of us took the elevator to the pool deck in our bathing suits, which made me feel as if I was on vacation for the first time, maybe ever. But when I turned to Celia, she seemed to shrink into herself, maybe more than she literally had by then, and she made a point of covering herself with a very large beach wrap. She had me digging through our 3 suitcases to find it. And when I did find it, I was surprised it took me so long because it was so large. I said, "Celia, you have your beach shorts, your tunic. You don't need this blanket wrapped around you for a short elevator ride." But she insisted. She did not say she didn't want anyone to see her body. Maybe because I would have told her once again that she looked perfectly fine. She largely did. I don't think everyone would be able to say what afflicted her, but she wrapped this enormous shawl around her body, looking something like a magenta mummy on crutches, and probably drew even more attention to herself than she would have without it on. The elevator opened to the rooftop. It overlooked the Hollywood Hills, downtown, and, if you squinted very tightly, the Pacific Ocean in the distance. There was that very particular LA smog providing a haze over all the buildings, a haze that almost does not look like pollution. It could just be the foggy borders of a nostalgic memory, which I suppose is just another type of pollution, though I suppose not quite so unhealthy. The girls immediately ran to the pool's edge and jumped into the glittering water. They scared away the few adults in the shallow end. A line of lounge chairs with blue cushions lined one edge of the pool, and 4 cabanas sat behind the lounge chairs. Clay pots with palms or monstrous birds of paradise decorated the sun deck. Celia reserved a cabana with a bed and slowly climbed inside. First her head disappeared in the cabana's shadow, and then her body, and finally one last foot. I could not tell if she could see anything from where she lay. I put down our beach bag and walked to the pool. The girls saw me and began chanting, "Cannonball! Cannonball! Cannonball!" I glanced at the other adults with their legs in the pool. They were all adults, young, glamorous adults. It seemed that no children stayed at this hotel. For a moment, I was almost embarrassed to not be so young and fit and glamorous. But then I thought of Celia, who would not leave her cabana. So I decided that maybe I should at least act young while I could. And I grinned at the unsuspecting women seated along the edge of the pool. And I leaped into the air very high as I could, and folded my knees against my chest, doing the first cannonball I had done in probably 40 years. I had fun swimming with the girls, though after our fingers shriveled and the three of us sat at the edge of the pool, sometimes looking through the haze past the glass railings at the edges of the roof, seeing miles upon miles of buildings and only a sliver of the ocean in the distance. And maybe it wasn't even the ocean we were seeing. Perhaps it was mostly the sky, and we were deceived by the smog. But I think all three of us realized at the same time, no matter our very large age difference, that we could have done this very same thing in New York if we ever wanted to. So why weren't we doing something we could only do in L.A.? I deduced this mostly by what Anna Maria said next. I miss the beach. Yes, I told her. Well, I miss the beach as well, but we need to stay here to be near the Jago for your mother. She needs to be at a meeting early in the morning. But this did nothing to satisfy the little girl, of course. She sprang up, and her feet splashed across the sun deck, leaving tiny gray footprints between us. Anna Maria stood at the foot of Celia's cabana and said, "We all want to go to the beach." I did not hear Celia respond, but I could hear her coughing. Margaret and I stood up and dripped over to them. Celia's bare calves and knees poked out from the shadow of the cabana. She leaned forward, letting the sun catch her face and hair. "Yeah," Celia said. "I miss the beach, too. The air downtown's no good for me anyway." She turned to me and said, "Let's tear down camp and head west." We booked the nicest hotel in Santa Monica that had 2 ocean view suites available. I said, "Celia, please, I don't need my own suite. I'll just stay in a basic room. I'll face an alley. I really don't care." And she said, "Really, Vicente, let's just enjoy this." Before I could hang Celia's clothes in the armoire, the girls had already put their bathing suits back on and asked us why we weren't at the beach yet. Celia smiled at them from the end of her bed and said, "Let's go. Forget the clothes, Vicente. I want to feel the sand between my toes before the sun goes down." The beaches in Los Angeles are massive. The sand stretches longer than a soccer field before one finally reaches the waves crashing ashore. When the 4 of us stood at the footpath outside the hotel leading to the beach, I worried whether Celia would even make it to the sand on her crutches. But she seemed unperturbed by the daunting distance ahead of us. In fact, she was first to start following Anna Maria and Margaret to the beach, swinging her mummified body along on her crutches. I had stood a moment longer, thinking we could go back to a pool at our new hotel. The views were better than at the first hotel, but Celia nearly kept up with the girls. When we finally reached the sand, Celia was clearly trying to not appear out of breath. I was surprised that she hadn't started coughing yet again, but the contorted look on her face told me that she held in a great deal of pain. Anna Maria and Margaret were already running ahead of us toward the water. "Girls," I yelled, "maybe we should play in the sand here, close to the hotel." They stopped and turned back to us, both of their shoulders slumping so hard I thought they might burrow into the sand. "But we want to go in the ocean," they both whined. Celia turned to me and said, "Then we're going to the ocean." Her crutches sunk into the sand. She swung her body forward. "Don't go so fast," Celia called out to the girls. She breathed heavily. Her lungs certainly couldn't keep up with all this movement, more than I'd seen in months. I wanted to ask if I may just carry her, but I also felt that to do so would offend her. She grunted and huffed and groaned. I told myself that if she ever looked over to me pleadingly, that I would step in and insist that she be carried. but she never so much as looked away from the ocean. She was dead set on being escorted by the girls to the water. With her crutches, she made 4 lines all the way across the beach because she didn't have the strength to lift any of the appendages fully off the ground. The sun was still hot despite being 5 p.m., but even if it had been 20 degrees cooler, I think that the physical exertion would have still made the sweat pour down her face, sometimes dripping off of her eyelashes. The waves became louder the closer we approached the water. We were at the ridge where the sand finally gets wet and slopes down into the ocean at low tide. But Celia did not stop. She followed the girls over the wet sand, the bottom of her crutches digging into it, making the sound of a knife carving bone. The remnants of a wave spread across the sand, inching its way over Celia's bare feet. And she finally stopped. The sun glowed across her face, her magenta wrap, making her appear to be on fire. She closed her eyes and lightly smiled. And for the first time in the 10 minutes that we'd crossed the beach, she seemed to enjoy the sea air. She exhaled more air than I thought her lungs were any longer capable of holding. She opened her eyes to watch the girls kicking up water in the shallow waves. Celia dropped her crutches and tried to slowly sit down. But she fell backwards, and I was worried that she was hurt. But she was laughing almost as soon as she landed on her back. We spent 2 hours in that one spot until the girls could no longer forgo dinner. Celia spent much of that time gazing up and down the beach. She said, "I wish I could go for a beach walk. I feel like I've been missing out on beach walks all of a sudden. You know, Vicente, maybe we should move the studio to LA. I think I've been missing out on this all my life. Maybe Bent was right. Maybe I was always supposed to be a California girl." I laughed. "You? I don't think any one country, let alone a single state, could have you to themselves, Celia Merode." "That might be," she said. "But really, if I beat this thing, I really think we should move the studio out here." "Yes," I told her, though probably not at all convincingly. "When you beat this thing." "Look at the girls," she said. "They've been in the water for nearly 2 hours now. I think they're Californians." "Girls!" They both turned to us. "Are you Californians?" They both smiled and said, "Yes, yes." And Margaret, the jokester between the two of them, she extended her arms to her front and back, pretending to be balancing on a surfboard, and said, "We're California girls." The next morning's meeting was disappointing, though Celia made as if it was nothing. There were delays in the construction. The building probably would not officially open until late 2018. Celia, however, wasn't concerned. She nodded and smiled at the board members. "We'll be here," she told them. I must congratulate the board members, because they did a very convincing job of saying how excited they'll be to have her at the opening party. A lift brought Celia back to the hotel where the girls had remained with you and your kids, their cousins. I told her that I had business to attend to at one of our friends' studios in Boyle Heights. She seemed disappointed that I would not be riding back to Santa Monica with her, but I insisted that it was very important. And it was. I walked into the studio truly astonished by what they had already accomplished. It was nearly finished. I had only called them the night before, mere minutes after I'd returned to my suite from the beach. I'd had the idea sooner, but I needed to hold my tongue in front of Celia so that it would remain a surprise. You guys, I told them, this is truly amazing. I didn't expect it to be nearly finished. And they looked almost embarrassed, blushing slightly, as my friend said, well, it's for Celia. We'd do anything for her. After some finishing touches, we loaded it up onto one of their trucks and drove back to Santa Monica. We already attracted stares as we carried it out onto the beach. People filmed us with their own cameras. We carried it to where I knew Celia and the family would be. I had remained in contact with her all afternoon, to the point where Celia became suspicious, wondering why I was so intent on knowing her location on the beach. She merely kept texting back, same place. I'd check again 15 minutes later. Same place. And I checked again as we stood with it on the beach. OMG, same place. So we carried it to where she sat and watched her family play in the waves. Celia did not hear us coming. We stopped at her side and gently laid it down beside her. She turned, saw us, and the look on her face was equal parts disapproval and amusement as she leaned back to take it in. What are you going to do with that? Do you like your sedan chair? I asked. It was a truly marvelous chair. I'd asked our friends to take inspiration from the gestatorial chairs that the popes were carried on. The chair was no less than a king's throne, with red velvet lining the seat and back cushions. There were golden baubles that looked like pineapples adorning the top of the high backrest. Silver tassels blew in the wind from the bottom of the seat, and an intricate pattern of silver leaves and vines was painted on the frame of the chair, and the red velvet continued down to the steps that led up to the throne, and there were, of course, 2 long wooden poles jutting from both sides like skis. My sedan chair, she said. Yes, I said. It is for you. We are going to take a beach walk, like you asked. And she said, that's not what I meant, Vicente. Ah, but this is even better, I said. She laughed and shook her head. She eyed the chair suspiciously. No, I don't think so, she said. You laughed, but also appeared used to such nonsense. You said, she told me too. I know she wants to go up and down the beach. And Celia said, I don't think I want to do this. Ah, I thought you might say that, but Celia, I became very serious, mock stern almost. That is why I am making this a performance piece. You haven't helped me with one of my pieces in a very long time. I dare say it's been years even. So I am asking you to do so now. I need Celia Merode to ride on this beautiful sedan chair up and down the beach. And you are the only Celia Merode I know. So please, get in. She turned to you. Don't look at me, you said. I'm Marguerite Merode. Celia stood and gingerly stepped up to her throne. She climbed up and twisted her body around to take her seat. And she looked down at the poles that were half buried in the sand. All right, boys, she said. Let's get this over with. I had recruited 4 friends who were more or less fitter than other artist friends of ours. I said, okay, guys. And then the 4 of them stripped down to the tight matching magenta shorts we had bought on the way to Santa Monica. Oh, Celia said. Is this how it's going to be? I took a position in front of them with a small camcorder, and then the men each took hold of a post. They hoisted her up into the air, and Celia giggled. She was not prone to giggling, but here she giggled. The men positioned the poles on their shoulders, and then we paraded down the beach. I had my camera, and the girls followed along with their cousins and you. At first, Celia appeared embarrassed, bouncing along as she was carried among the sunbathers and beach walkers. People began asking who this magnificent woman was that we carried down the beach, and without even needing to tell my carriers, they immediately barked back, "This is Celia Merode! She is the greatest living artist in the world!" Celia again giggled. She buried her face into the palm of her hand, and then it would happen again. Somebody would ask who she is, and they were immediately told that she was Celia Merode, the greatest artist in the world. And it was so beautiful. People started waving to her and telling her how honored they were to meet her. I doubt that many, if any of them, had ever really heard of her before, but they knew that they were in the presence of greatness. They were told so it must be true. You could see it in the way their faces glowed. A woman on the sand shouted, "We love you, Celia!" And by this time, Celia had begun to take her royal duties quite seriously. She yelled back, "And I love you too!" She grandly waved back to the crowds who had begun surrounding and following us down the beach. At another point, two absurdly strong men who appeared to have just left Muscle Beach approached my carriers and asked if they could help. So the sedan chair then had two muscle-bound bodybuilders leading our procession. And all the while, you'd hear somebody at the outskirts of the crowd ask who we were carrying. And yet more people, our new followers, would announce back to them, "The greatest artist in the world!" Some people thought we were filming a traditional movie, or worse, one of those viral campaigns. Then somebody asked again, who is this? "The greatest artist in the world!" Celia was laughing all the while, reaching down to shake all the hands that reached up to shake hers. "The greatest artist in the world!" Hours later, after the crowds had dispersed and we needed time to bask in the memory of the fun we'd just had that day, Celia and I sat on the beach, squeezed side by side into the sedan chair. It sat on the sand, facing the waves and the sunset. The girls had long gone back into the hotel with you after being in the sun for too long that day. I had an electricity I hadn't felt in a long time. "We should bring this all over LA, I said. People would love it. We should show up outside of a Dodgers game. We can start at Dodger Stadium and carry you all the way down to Echo Park and Silver Lake. It'd be magnificent. The faces, people would light up just believing that they were in the presence of greatness." Which of course they were, but even the children, they certainly didn't know who you were, but they looked up at you as if you were their queen. We need to bring this everywhere. Maybe we bring it across the country. A road trip. Celia laughed along with me. And then she shook her head. "Oh," she said softly. Her tone became somewhat sullen. "You know I can't do that." I suddenly lost my moment of electricity and was brought back down to the reality we shared. "But," I said, trying to say words I knew I didn't believe in, even just earlier that day, "you'll beat this." She smiled at my naivete, like I told a joke I did not understand. She closed her eyes and shook her head. She opened them to me again. "Thank you," she said. I said, "You're welcome," and paused. "For what?" "For this." She waved her palm at the sedan chair beneath us. "For everything, really." I smiled at her. "Of course," I said. I looked down at my lap and then up at the sun that was setting over the Pacific. It had no clouds to skirt past. It was just there in front of us, golden and alone. Despite Los Angeles' pollution, the smog must not have reached across the ocean because the sunset lacked the vibrant colors we were accustomed to in New York. It was just the sun, alone, sinking down to the ocean. Then she said, "You know, Vicente, I think it might be nice to die here." "In LA?" "Right here," she said. "On the beach. In this chair. Right now." "Oh?" I did not like this idea. I could just sit here, she continued, and watch the sunset, and then I could just die. I'd be okay with that. Should we try it? Try it? Here, she said, maybe we should film this. Get out your camera. Or just your phone, that'll work. I pulled out my phone. Maybe film it from farther back, she said. Yeah, stand about 10 feet over there, and just get me sitting in the chair looking off into the sunset. I slid off the chair and took 5 steps onto the beach. How is that? Celia asked. I tilted the phone onto its side and began filming the sunset, the ocean lapping ashore, and Celia together. The sunlight was brilliant against her in the chair. The orange glow was stunning across her face. And minute by minute the light dampened, until the sun slowly disappeared behind the curve of the Pacific, and my phone's camera could only pick up the black silhouette of Celia sitting in her chair. I was afraid to ask if I should stop filming because I did not want to learn that there would be no response. So I stood for a minute, another minute, another minute. I was hoping for her to yell cut. Well, she finally said, and I nearly dropped my phone. Download it, Vicente. Throw a label on it. I don't know. Celia escapes death or something. Keep the money for it. I helped her down from the sedan chair, and I picked up her crutches. We took our first few steps back to the hotel. Maybe I'm not really dying, she said as she slid a foot through the sand. Maybe I'm not. Wouldn't that be nice?